Lore? Am I a funny platformer about a plumber throwing his hat at things so I can control them? It's more likely than you think. Yeah, believe it or not, Super Mario Odyssey has actual lore, and I'm not talking about its little references to past games like the Tail Tree reappearing from Mario 3D Land, and I'm not gonna be the next guy to repeat all the Donkey Kong references in New Donk City either. It sounds insane, but there are several kingdoms in this game that contain little lore drops, referencing their history and what the actual place in the world is of these areas that feel created to just be fun sandboxes. Take for example the Cascade Kingdom in Fossil Falls. At the time Mario and Cappy stopped by, this is one of the only large kingdoms in the game to not have any native inhabitants. There is no civilization here. Only enemies and a T-Rex. While in real life, a living, breathing T-Rex would be the discovery of the century, in the Mario world that appears to be a bit more nuanced. The brochure does mention it attracts tourists and is even the kingdom's biggest draw, but it doesn't make such a big deal out of it as you might think. It is possibly due to the fact that the brochure doesn't want to commit to the idea of dinosaurs being extinct. It does call the T-Rex ancient and mentions it still lives here, but something like believed to be extinct is nowhere to be found here. Probably for the best, considering that Dinosaur Island is literally a location Mario has visited prior. However, there are indications that the dinosaurs of the prehistoric era aren't the only ones who called the Cascade Kingdom home. When Mario and Cappy first arrive here, they find an airship buried and covered in dirt. This obviously then becomes their ship, the Odyssey, but that doesn't change the fact this had been there for a long time presumably. The brochure does highlight that it is not as old as the rest of the kingdom, calling it old but not ancient, and further theorizes it came to end up here as a result of bonitors traveling around and settling in the Cascade Kingdom. And there are more traces of that to be found here. First of all, the presence of moon rocks in the large spire next to the water has led to local theories that it hails from the moon originally. Whether that is true or not is not confirmed, and it doesn't really matter either. What is most important is that in order for the Cascade Kingdom to have local rumors in the first place, it must have had locals at one point. Another sign of a former civilization residing in the Cascade Kingdom is what the brochure refers to as the Great Barrier, which is actually just a cliffside with the 8-bit warp pipe inside. This structure is not a natural creation at all, but is said formed by people over the course of history. Again, a sign that at one point a civilization resided alongside these dinosaurs. And that is really something Super Mario Odyssey likes to do more than anything. Especially if a kingdom doesn't have native inhabitants, the brochure often hints at the idea that that has not always been the case. They are just no longer around, the civilization has died out or left over time. Even better examples than the Cascade Kingdom are the kingdoms in the sky, mostly used for boss battles. The Cloud Kingdom does at least have something resembling a sandbox to go along with it, although the brochure doesn't highlight that as the key component of this world. Instead, it highlights how the Cloud Kingdom is essentially an archaeological site, with the remnants of a past civilization its most interesting element, and that is something you can so easily miss. It is explained that this civilization looked down on the people below, literally, I hope. The Nimbus Arena, which is where we battle Bowser, features markings that depict the phases of the moon, further suggesting that not only is this area man-made to begin with, it was probably also a site of worship or research, or at least a purpose that showcases that people permanently lived here. You're not making a sundial in a place you're just passing through, is what I'm saying. And then there is the arch that seems to be specifically aligned with the moon, almost purposefully. The brochure and the researchers that look into the Cloud Kingdom's history are unable to tell whether this is a coincidence, a natural phenomena, or even the work of this past civilization, in which case there is something beyond what we see in the final game. A civilization capable of making structures out of clouds? That's highly unique, and reminiscent of the hat clouds, which are those hat-shaped things that Mario can turn into platforms to stand on. According to the brochure, they were first discovered in Fossil Falls, which is interesting when you consider that not only is that another kingdom with a lost civilization, it is also a kingdom which is basically confirmed to have at one point been inhabited by bonitors. And that suddenly makes the hat-shaped design of these clouds very suspicious. It's almost as if the bonitors of Fossil Falls discovered the blocks, or perhaps used them to make their way over to the Cloud Kingdom before then continuing to live there. That would explain why Fossil Falls has less signs of a civilization than the Cloud Kingdom does, although it doesn't explain where the people high in the sky have gone nowadays. Or who knows, maybe this is all just an elaborate Super Mario RPG reference. But okay, of course we can't talk about all this Dark Souls style lore with big implications hidden away in some descriptions few people bother to read without mentioning the Ruined Kingdom. It is probably the kingdom in Mario Odyssey that brings up the most questions, due to how sheerly out of place it feels compared to the rest of not just Odyssey, but really just the Mario series in general. But here's the thing. Reading the brochure allows us to piece together most questions that remain. Now, it doesn't take an eagle eye to notice that the ruined kingdom is completely destroyed, but at the same time there is clear evidence of medieval-like castle structures that were undoubtedly created by a past civilization. In fact, the brochure highlights these structures aren't just random buildings or even residencies. Both the imposing tower and the plaza on top of it were created to harness, absorb and protect against the extreme amount of electricity found in the thunderstorms that constantly loom over the ruined kingdom, which was called Crumbleden before everything went south. Talk about normative determinism. Anyway, this is where one question remains. Has Crumbleden always been around thunderstorms? Or did that come later and did they initially reside here with clear blue skies? We don't know, simple as that, but it is quite important. Because that helps us get a better sense of the timeline here, which for the rest is actually pretty clear. You see, we know that the dragon Mario ends up defeating is the reason Crumbleden is no more. While its actual name may be Ruined Dragon, its title is Lord of Lightning, strongly suggesting this the cause or at least related to these thunderstorms that the residents of Crumbleden fought so hard against. Evidence of that can be found in the source still laying around, and the brochure refers to conflicts and battles several times. The people of Crumbleden were at war with the Ruined Dragon and lost. The only question that still remains is whether their structures were built as an answer to the thunderstorms, with the Ruined Dragon arriving later, or whether they were built to directly counter the Ruined Dragon. And the latter appears to be what the game is hinting at. The arena where Mario fights the dragon is called the Great Altar, and the brochure suggests it was created as a place where the residents of Crumbleden could either talk, negotiate, or at least get in contact with the dragon, presumably to ask it kindly to leave. Or fight it, because remember, this plaza at the top is specifically built to counter the enormous amounts of electricity created by the Lord of Lightning. It wasn't meant to be, however. The dragon we defeat with a simple little plumber destroyed this entire civilization, leaving none behind. Now, while I have so far only looked at kingdoms without current civilizations, I personally think it's just more interesting the devs took the time to establish that they were at one point there. There is some interesting lore about some kingdoms that do have some form of a society in the final game as well. First up, the Sand Kingdom, with Tossed Arena the place for civilized locals to reside. Obviously, the local culture takes a lot from Latin America, Mexico specifically, and it wears that proudly on its sleeve. But what is much harder to pick up on is that the Tostorainans are actually quite religious. In fact, they worship the being that is freezing over the Sand Kingdom when Mario first arrives. Yes, I am talking about Knuckleattack, the boss of this kingdom. His face is depicted all over the inverted pyramid, which is described as a symbol of how those joined by it will never part, even if the world turns upside down. The message is nice, very positive and befitting of the happy Tostorainans, but it does leave the question of what is going on here with Knuckleattack. Its image is frequently etched into these ruins like it's some form of deity, and its Japanese name leaves absolutely nothing to the imagination. It's Achinya Shin, which means Tostoraina god. It couldn't be more obvious if it tried. I also think that the Japanese name confirms it is the Tostorainans who worship it, and not some old civilization that has long been lost. After all, the brochure refers to the town of Tostoraina as being a hub for those visiting the pyramid, suggesting it is actually much newer than the pyramid itself. But if Knuckleattack is the Tostoraina god, then it seems like the Tostorainans originally resided in or near the inverted pyramid and didn't actually build the town of Tostoraina until they learned about the existence of capitalism and tourism. They may all be skeletons, but they surely have brains. And finally, we have another kingdom shrouded in mystery, the Wooded Kingdom, specifically the Steam Gardens aspect of the kingdom. The first few lines of the brochure immediately highlight what is so odd about this place. No one knows who built the giant machines dotting this land. On one hand, this feels like an easy cop-out, especially since zero hints at an answer are given, but on the other, there is something here. We have seen so many areas and places in the Mario world where you can ask, how the hell was this ever made? And the answer always is, shh, don't think about it, it's just Mario. But here, we have the brochure actually acknowledging that the structures were built once upon a time by someone or something. And that immediately brings up questions about the residents too. The Steam Gardeners don't only look like robots, they are robots. The brochure doesn't hide that, and robots, they are artificial. Created by someone or something, just like these structures. Again, I can't give you an answer to these questions, but I do have two small theories. First, there is the tagline of the kingdom. Ancient gardens tended by futuristic machines. It is out there, I admit, but the word choice of futuristic could indicate there is some time travel involved here. Either the creators managed to develop time travel as well, or perhaps it was created by a future society who knew they would need the Steam Gardens for something in the future, I don't know. It's flimsy, I'm just trying my best here. Another possibility is the former residents of the Ruined Kingdom. Their brochure highlights how this lost civilization were expert constructors and builders, exactly the type of people who could develop the structures of the Steam Gardens, and they clearly had an abundance of electricity at their disposal necessary to keep this whole thing running. They had the means to do it at least, but that is pretty much where the theory ends due to sheer lack of information on both the Steam Gardens and the residents of the Ruined Kingdom. And that brings us to an end. What are your theories on these lost civilizations from Mario Odyssey? Share it in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, please consider giving it a like and subscribing. And if you're also interested in either the Pokemon or Fire Emblem series, you may want to check out my other channels, Piantapedia and Nagapedia. Links are in the description. For now, thanks for watching and enjoy the rest of your day.